The Ford's landing signal officer watched through binoculars as Lightning 301 approached the carrier on a smoking, unstable approach path. Sarah's damaged F-35 was trailing fuel vapor and flying with a noticeable wing-down attitude, clear signs that her aircraft had suffered significant battle damage. The entire flight deck crew stood ready for an emergency recovery, with crash and rescue equipment positioned along both sides of the landing area. Lightning 301, "You're looking a little rough up there," transmitted the LSO, his voice calm despite the obvious danger of the situation. "We've got you cleared for immediate recovery. Deck is ready with emergency equipment standing by." Sarah fought to maintain control as her primary hydraulic system finally failed completely. The F-35's backup flight controls were keeping the aircraft airborne, but response to her inputs was becoming sluggish and unpredictable. Through her cracked visor, she could see the Ford's deck growing larger as she descended toward the wire engagement zone. "Tower, Lightning 301, declaring emergency," she transmitted, her voice steady despite the dire circumstances. "Primary hydraulics are gone, left engine is losing power, and I'm showing multiple system failures. Request immediate trap." Behind her, the air battle continued to rage as American and hostile fighters engaged in deadly combat across hundreds of square miles of ocean. Her tactical display showed the results of the engagement that her initial fight had triggered. 18 enemy aircraft had been shot down, with 3 more damaged and retreating toward their base. The cost had been high for both sides, but the aggressive enemy response to her reconnaissance mission had revealed defensive capabilities that intelligence analysts would study for years. The most significant discovery had come from her electronic surveillance systems, which had recorded detailed signatures from previously unknown radar and missile systems. The data she had gathered during her desperate fight would reshape American understanding of enemy capabilities throughout the region. But none of that would matter if she couldn't get her damaged aircraft safely back to the carrier. Sarah's approach speed was higher than normal due to her damaged flight controls, and the F-35 was using more fuel than she had remaining for a second attempt. This landing would have to be perfect on the first try, or she would face the prospect of ejecting into the shark-infested waters of the South China Sea. The thought of ejection brought her back to the mocking comments of the SEALs weeks earlier. Their jokes about her size would seem irrelevant if she ended up floating in a life raft waiting for rescue. As Lightning 301 crossed the carrier's wake, Sarah could see the deck crew tracking her approach with obvious concern. Her aircraft's battle damage was clearly visible. Holes in the wing and fuselage, scorch marks from near-miss explosions, and the steady stream of fuel vapor trailing behind her left engine. Chief Petty Officer Williams stood near the landing area with the rest of the maintenance crew, ready to begin emergency repairs the moment her aircraft came to a stop. The LSO's voice guided her through the final approach phase. "Lightning 301, you're slightly high and right of center line. Adjust your approach path and prepare for engagement." Sarah made the necessary corrections, fighting against the aircraft's tendency to roll left due to the damaged wing. Her airspeed was stable, but higher than optimal for a carrier landing. The margin for error was virtually non-existent, too fast, and she would miss all 4 arresting wires, too slow, and she would stall into the ocean just short of the deck. The Ford's deck rushed up to meet her as Lightning 301 crossed the round down at the stern of the ship. Sarah felt the familiar thump as her main landing gear touched the steel deck, followed immediately by the tremendous deceleration as her tailhook caught the number 3 arresting wire. The massive hydraulic system brought 30 tons of damaged fighter aircraft to a complete stop in less than 300 feet. For a moment, Sarah simply sat in her cockpit as the significance of her survival sank in. She had engaged and defeated multiple enemy aircraft while gathering crucial intelligence on hostile defensive capabilities. More importantly, she had proven that courage and skill mattered more than the physical characteristics that had drawn so much criticism from her detractors. The deck crew swarmed around her aircraft as she began the shutdown sequence. Chief Williams climbed the ladder to her cockpit, his experienced eye already assessing the extent of battle damage. The F-35 stealth coatings would require extensive repair, and several major systems would need replacement before the aircraft could fly again. "Welcome back, Captain," Williams said as Sarah removed her helmet. "That was some impressive flying up there. The whole deck crew was watching your approach. We've never seen a more professional emergency recovery." Sarah climbed down from her aircraft on slightly unsteady legs, the adrenaline of combat finally giving way to exhaustion. Around her, the organized chaos of carrier operations continued as other aircraft returned from their missions. The air battle was winding down, but intelligence reports suggested that additional hostile forces were moving toward the area. Commander Torres met her at the base of the island's superstructure, his weathered face showing a mixture of relief and professional respect. "Outstanding work up there, Sarah. Your reconnaissance data is already being analyzed by intelligence specialists, and preliminary reports show you gathered more information on enemy capabilities than we've collected in the past 6 months." As Sarah walked toward the debriefing room, she passed several groups of pilots and deck crew members. Their conversations stopped as she approached, but instead of the dismissive comments she had grown accustomed to, she heard expressions of genuine respect for her performance in combat. Word of her single-handed engagement with multiple enemy fighters had spread quickly through the ship's communication networks. The formal debriefing lasted 3 hours as intelligence specialists questioned her about every aspect of the mission. Her helmet camera had recorded the entire engagement, providing video evidence of enemy aircraft and missile systems that had previously existed only in satellite photographs. The electronic warfare data from her aircraft would require weeks of analysis to fully understand. Captain Torres concluded the debriefing with remarks that would later be included in Sarah's fitness report. Captain Chin's performance under fire demonstrates the highest standards of naval aviation. Her tactical decision-making and aggressive prosecution of enemy targets prevented a potentially disastrous intelligence failure while inflicting significant losses on hostile forces. Later that evening, Sarah sat in her stateroom writing a letter to her parents. She couldn't discuss the classified details of her mission, but she could share her thoughts about the challenges and rewards of serving as a naval aviator in an increasingly dangerous world. Her laptop screen showed news reports about the air battle, with Pentagon officials confirming that American forces had successfully defended their right to operate in international waters. A knock at her door interrupted her writing. Lieutenant Martinez entered with a message that had just been delivered from the Ford's communication center. Sarah opened the envelope and found orders transferring her to the Navy's elite test pilot school, where she would help evaluate new weapons systems for the F-35 program. "Congratulations," Martinez said with a genuine smile. "Test pilot school is the fast track to command positions and possibly even astronaut training. Looks like someone noticed your performance out there today." As Sarah prepared for sleep, she thought about the events that had brought her to this moment. The mocking comments from the SEALs seemed like ancient history, their prejudices proven irrelevant by the harsh realities of aerial combat. She had faced 18 enemy aircraft in a single engagement and emerged victorious, gathering intelligence that would protect American forces throughout the region. The final irony came the next morning when Chief Petty Officer Williams delivered a message that had been relayed through military communication channels. Senior Chief Morrison, the SEAL who had questioned her qualifications weeks earlier, had sent a brief note acknowledging her performance in combat. The message was simple: "Well done, Captain. I was wrong about you." Sarah smiled as she read the note, then filed it away with her other military correspondence. The respect of her peers mattered, but it was less important than the knowledge that she had proven herself capable of meeting any challenge. The F-35 Lightning II had lived up to its reputation as the world's most advanced fighter aircraft, but its success depended entirely on the skill and courage of the pilot who flew it. As the Ford continued its patrol in the South China Sea, Sarah Chun prepared for her next assignment with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced the ultimate test and emerged victorious. The doubters and critics would always exist, but their opinions seemed increasingly irrelevant in the face of demonstrated competence under fire. She had shown that being the best pilot had nothing to do with size or gender, and everything to do with dedication, skill, and the courage to engage the enemy regardless of the odds. The first surface-to-air missile streaked past Lightning 301's canopy like a telephone pole moving at 3 times the speed of sound. Sarah's threat warning system screamed continuously as she threw the F-35 into a violent diving turn, dispensing chaff and flares to confuse the incoming weapons. Her G-suit inflated around her legs and torso, fighting to keep blood flowing to her brain as the aircraft pulled nearly 9 times the force of gravity. "Overlord, Lightning 301 is engaged defensive," she transmitted through gritted teeth, her voice strained by the crushing forces. Multiple SAMs tracking and maneuvering to defeat. The second missile was closer, its proximity fuse detonating the warhead just 50 feet from her aircraft. Shrapnel peppered the F-35's left wing and fuselage, but the fighter's robust construction absorbed the damage without losing critical systems. Sarah felt the aircraft shudder from the impacts, but her displays remained green and the engine continued producing full power. As she recovered from her defensive maneuver, Sarah's tactical display showed a nightmare scenario developing around her. 8 enemy fighters were vectoring toward her position, while additional surface-to-air missiles climbed from multiple launch sites on the disputed islands. The hostile air defense network was far more capable than intelligence estimates had suggested, and she was trapped in the middle of it. But Sarah's engineering background had taught her to see patterns in complex systems, and her fighter pilot training had honed her ability to think tactically under extreme pressure. The enemy's aggressive response revealed the locations of radar sites and missile batteries that had been hidden during her initial reconnaissance. More importantly, their focus on her single aircraft had created an opportunity that she was uniquely positioned to exploit. "Overlord, Lightning 301," she transmitted while climbing back to altitude. "Enemy air defenses are fully active and revealing themselves. I can provide precise targeting coordinates for immediate strike missions." The response from Commander Torres was immediate. "Lightning 301, negative on strike coordinates. Your priority is survival and evasion. Hornet Flight is moving to provide support." Sarah checked her fuel and weapon status while scanning for threats. She carried 2 120 AMRAAM missiles for air-to-air combat, plus a full load of ammunition for her internal 25mm cannon. Against 8 enemy fighters and an unknown number of surface-to-air missiles, her chances of survival seemed minimal. But the F-35's stealth capabilities and advanced sensors gave her advantages that the enemy pilots couldn't see. The hostile fighters had spread into 2 separate formations, trying to bracket her escape routes back toward the carrier. Their tactics were sound, forcing her to choose between 2 equally dangerous paths through their defensive coverage. Sarah realized that conventional evasion would likely result in her aircraft being shot down before she could reach safety. Instead of running, she decided to attack. The decision went against every instinct for self-preservation, but Sarah's tactical analysis showed it was her best option. The enemy fighters were focused on intercepting a fleeing target, not defending against an aggressive attack from an aircraft they had already engaged. Her F-35 stealth characteristics would be less effective at close range, but her superior sensors and weapon systems could provide a decisive advantage in the confusion of close combat. Sarah selected the northern enemy formation and began a high-speed approach from their blind spot. Her radar locked onto the lead aircraft while her electronic warfare systems jammed their communications and threat warning equipment. The enemy pilots had no indication they were being targeted until her first AMRAAM missile was already in the air. The lead hostile fighter exploded in a brilliant fireball as the advanced air-to-air missile found its target. Sarah was already maneuvering to engage the second aircraft when her threat warning system indicated multiple enemy missiles inbound from the southern formation. She had perhaps 10 seconds to complete her attack before being forced back into defensive maneuvering. Her second AMRAAM missile tracked perfectly, striking an enemy fighter that was attempting to lock onto her aircraft with its own weapons. The explosion sent debris spinning through the air as Sarah dove toward the ocean surface, using the F-35's superior agility to avoid the incoming missiles. Her defensive systems worked overtime, dispensing countermeasures and jamming enemy radar guidance systems. The hostile pilots were now shouting over their radios, their calm professionalism replaced by confusion and alarm. Intelligence intercepts later revealed that they had believed they were facing a full squadron of stealth fighters rather than a single aircraft. Sarah's aggressive tactics had created the impression of a coordinated attack, causing the enemy formation to break apart as individual pilots maneuvered defensively. As she skimmed just above the wave tops, Sarah's electronic surveillance systems detected additional enemy aircraft launching from the main island. The air battle was escalating rapidly, with more than 20 hostile fighters now airborne and seeking targets. Her fuel state was becoming critical, and she needed to reach the carrier's defensive perimeter before her tanks ran dry. But the enemy fighters weren't finished with her. A pair of advanced interceptors had positioned themselves between Lightning 301 and the Ford, forcing Sarah to either fight her way through them or attempt a dangerous detour that would consume her remaining fuel. The lead enemy pilot was clearly experienced, maintaining proper position and denying her any easy escape routes. Sarah's cannon sight showed a perfect tracking solution on the lead interceptor. At this range, the 25mm rounds would be devastatingly effective against the enemy aircraft's relatively thin skin. But engaging with guns meant closing to within visual range, where her stealth advantages would be neutralized, and the fight would come down to pilot skill and aircraft performance. The enemy pilot made the decision for her by launching an infrared-guided missile at close range. Sarah rolled inverted and pulled toward the ocean surface, using the sun's reflection off the water to confuse the missile's seeker head. The weapon detonated harmlessly as she completed a rolling climb that brought her guns to bear on the hostile fighter. Her first burst of cannon fire walked across the enemy aircraft's wing route, severing control cables and fuel lines. The hostile fighter entered an uncontrolled spin as its pilot ejected, his parachute blossoming against the blue sky. Sarah was already engaging the second interceptor when multiple new contacts appeared on her threat display. The southern enemy formation had finally closed to weapons range, and they were launching everything they had. Air-to-air missiles filled the sky around Lightning 301 as Sarah maneuvered desperately to avoid the incoming weapons. Her electronic countermeasures were overwhelmed by the sheer number of threats, and several missiles achieved close enough proximity to cause additional damage to her aircraft. Warning lights illuminated across her instrument panel as systems began failing from battle damage. Her left engine was running rough, possibly from ingesting debris from one of the explosions. Hydraulic pressure was dropping in her primary flight control system, making the aircraft increasingly difficult to handle. Most critically, her fuel consumption had increased dramatically due to the damaged engine and the high-power maneuvering required to stay alive. But Sarah's analysis of the tactical situation showed her something the enemy pilots had missed. Their aggressive pursuit had brought them well within range of the Ford's defensive systems, and Captain Torres was coordinating a response that would trap the hostile fighters between multiple American formations. The Super Hornets from the original Combat Air Patrol were approaching from the east, while additional aircraft launched from the carrier created a second intercept line. All Overlord units, Lightning 301. Sarah transmitted while continuing her evasive maneuvering. Hostile formations are moving into engagement area Delta. Recommend immediate prosecution of targets to prevent their escape. The radio frequency erupted with activity as American aircraft moved to engage the enemy fighters that had been pursuing Sarah. The hostile pilots suddenly found themselves outnumbered and surrounded, their hunters becoming the hunted in a matter of seconds. Sarah's desperate fight had drawn them into a carefully prepared trap. As the larger air battle developed around her, Sarah fought to keep her damaged aircraft flying. The F-35's fly-by-wire flight control system was compensating for the battle damage, but her options were becoming increasingly limited. She needed to reach the carrier quickly before her failing systems made controlled flight impossible. The Ford appeared on her displays as a welcome sight, its massive deck cutting through the ocean swells toward her position. But landing a damaged aircraft on a moving carrier deck would require every skill she possessed, and there was no guarantee that her systems would hold together long enough to complete the approach. The Ford's flight deck at dawn was a carefully choreographed ballet of controlled chaos. Steam rose from the catapult tracks as the nuclear-powered carrier prepared for its first combat-ready launch cycle in the South China Sea. Sarah stood beside her F-35, conducting her pre-flight inspection while dozens of deck crew members prepared other aircraft for the morning's missions. The intelligence picture had grown more concerning overnight. Satellite imagery showed additional fighter aircraft arriving at the hostile island base, while radio intercepts suggested that enemy commanders were becoming increasingly aggressive in their warnings to approaching vessels. The Ford's Air Wing would conduct what appeared to be routine training exercises, but everyone understood the underlying message. American forces would continue to operate in international waters regardless of threats from hostile nations. Chief Petty Officer Williams, Sarah's assigned plane captain for this deployment, completed his inspection of the Lightning's external systems. Williams was a 20-year Navy veteran who had worked on everything from F-14 Tomcats to modern Super Hornets. His expertise with carrier aircraft was evident in every efficient movement as he checked weapons systems and verified the integrity of the stealth coatings. "She's ready for you, Captain," Williams reported, handing Sarah the maintenance logbook. "All systems are green, stealth configuration is optimal, and your defensive countermeasures are loaded and verified. Weather deck reports clear skies with 10-knot winds down the angle." Sarah signed the logbook and climbed the ladder to her cockpit. The F-35's advanced systems began their startup sequence as she settled into the ejection seat, her hands moving across the touch screen displays with the precision born of countless hours of training. The aircraft's fusion sensors immediately began processing information from the carrier's network, creating a comprehensive picture of the tactical situation. Through her helmet-mounted display, Sarah could see the positions of friendly aircraft throughout the area. Super Hornets were preparing for launch on the other catapults, while an E-2D Hawkeye early warning aircraft circled overhead, its powerful radar searching for any sign of hostile activity. The electronic picture showed clear skies for hundreds of miles in every direction, but Sarah knew that could change in minutes. Lightning 301, prepare for launch sequence, came the call from the air boss in the carrier's tower. Sarah acknowledged the transmission and ran through her final checks as deck crew members attached the launch bar to the catapult shuttle. The F-35's engine spooled up to full power, creating a controlled hurricane of heated air that was deflected by the jet blast deflector behind her aircraft. The catapult officer, known as the shooter, went through the standard launch signals that had been used on aircraft carriers for decades. Sarah saluted to indicate her readiness, then gripped the handles inside her cockpit as the massive steam catapult built pressure. The launch sequence lasted only seconds, but it accelerated the 30-ton fighter from 0 to 150 miles per hour in less than 300 feet. The sensation of catapult launch never lost its intensity. Sarah was pressed back into her seat with crushing force as the F-35 shot forward along the deck. Then, suddenly, became airborne as it reached the bow of the carrier. The transition from the solid deck to free flight was instantaneous and exhilarating, a reminder of why she had chosen to become a naval aviator despite all the challenges and prejudices she had faced. As Lightning 301 climbed away from the Ford, Sarah began receiving data links from the other aircraft in her flight. 2 Super Hornets had launched just minutes before her, and they were already establishing a combat air patrol pattern between the carrier and the disputed islands. Her mission was different. The F-35's stealth capabilities and advanced sensors made it ideal for gathering intelligence on enemy capabilities while remaining undetected. The disputed islands appeared on her displays as small dots of land surrounded by the vast blue of the South China Sea. Intelligence estimates suggested that over 40 hostile aircraft were based there, along with sophisticated surface-to-air missile systems and radar networks designed to deny access to enemy forces. Sarah's job was to probe those defenses carefully, gathering information about their capabilities without triggering an international incident. As she approached the outer edge of enemy radar coverage, Sarah activated the F-35's full stealth configuration. The aircraft's angular surfaces and special coatings were designed to minimize its radar signature, making it appear no larger than a small bird to most detection systems. Her speed dropped to just below the sound barrier to reduce infrared emissions, while her altitude remained high enough to avoid visual detection from the surface. The first sign of hostile activity came through her electronic warfare systems. Enemy radar emissions appeared on her threat display, showing the locations and capabilities of multiple search and tracking systems on the main island. Sarah's onboard computers automatically analyzed the signals, identifying specific radar types and their potential threat to friendly aircraft. Overlord, Lightning 301. She transmitted on the encrypted communication channel that linked her to the Ford's Combat Information Center. I'm picking up multiple search radars consistent with SA-21 and SA-20 surface-to-air missile systems. Enemy radar coverage extends approximately 200 nautical miles from the main island. The response came from Commander Torres, the Air Wing commander who was monitoring the mission from the carrier. Copy Lightning 301. Continue your reconnaissance, but maintain safe distance. We're seeing increased radio chatter from the island, indicating they're aware of our presence in the area. Sarah adjusted her course slightly, using the F-35 superior sensors to map the enemy defensive network from multiple angles. Her aircraft's passive electronic surveillance systems could detect and classify radar emissions without revealing her own position, providing valuable intelligence about hostile capabilities. The information would be crucial for planning future operations in the area. As she completed her surveillance pattern, Sarah noticed new contacts appearing on her display. Multiple aircraft were launching from the enemy airfield, their heat signatures clearly visible to her infrared sensors. The enemy fighters appeared to be advanced fourth-generation designs, capable of engaging targets at long range with sophisticated air-to-air missiles. Overlord, Lightning 301. I have multiple hostile aircraft launching from the main island. Count shows 12 fighters climbing to intercept altitude. They appear to be heading toward our combat air patrol. The radio frequency erupted with activity as the carrier's Combat Information Center coordinated a response. The Super Hornets on combat air patrol were vectored to intercept the hostile formation, while additional aircraft were prepared for launch from the Ford's deck. Sarah found herself in the unique position of being able to observe the developing situation from her stealthy vantage point. The hostile fighters spread out into an attack formation as they approached international airspace. Sarah could see their electronic emissions clearly on her displays, indicating active radar searches for American aircraft. The enemy pilots were experienced and professional, maintaining proper spacing and communication protocols as they closed the distance to the carrier's defensive perimeter. Lightning 301. This is Hornet 204. Came a transmission from the lead Super Hornet. Can you provide targeting information on the hostile formation? We're not getting clear radar locks from this angle. Sarah's position behind and slightly above the enemy formation gave her a perfect view of their deployment. Her F-35's advanced radar could track multiple targets simultaneously while remaining undetected, providing the kind of situational awareness that could prove decisive in air-to-air combat. She began transmitting precise targeting data to the Super Hornets, vectoring them toward optimal engagement positions. The tension continued building as both sides maneuvered for advantage. The hostile fighters maintained their course toward the carrier group, while American aircraft moved to intercept them before they could threaten the Ford. Sarah remained in her observation position, gathering intelligence and providing targeting support to the other pilots. Then, everything changed in an instant. Sarah's threat warning system suddenly activated, indicating that multiple enemy radars had locked onto her aircraft. The hostile formation had been accompanied by an advanced early warning aircraft that had managed to detect her despite the F-35 stealth capabilities. Enemy surface-to-air missiles were already in the air, streaking toward her position with deadly accuracy. Lightning 301 is spiked. Multiple SAMs inbound. Sarah transmitted as she began defensive maneuvers. The COM reconnaissance mission had suddenly become a desperate fight for survival, and she was completely alone against a coordinated enemy attack. Her training kicked in automatically as she prepared to face odds that would have seemed impossible just minutes before. The peaceful morning over the South China Sea had erupted into the largest air battle in decades, and Sarah Chun found herself at the center of a storm that would test every skill she possessed. The mocking voices of the SEALs seemed like a distant memory as she prepared to prove that courage and competence came in all sizes. 3 weeks later, the atmosphere at Naval Air Station Oceana had changed dramatically. The joint training exercises with the SEALs had concluded, but new orders had arrived that sent ripples of tension through the entire base. Intelligence reports indicated a significant military buildup in a disputed region of the South China Sea, where several nations claimed territorial rights over a chain of strategically important islands. Sarah sat in the intelligence briefing room alongside 15 other pilots from various squadrons. The walls were covered with satellite photographs showing naval vessels, aircraft formations, and military installations that hadn't existed just months before. Commander Patricia Walsh, the base intelligence officer, used a laser pointer to highlight specific locations on the large screen display. As of yesterday, we've confirmed the presence of at least 40 advanced fighter aircraft at this newly constructed airfield, Commander Walsh explained, indicating a small island that appeared to have been artificially expanded. These include 4th and 5th generation jets capable of engaging our forces at extended range. Additionally, surface-to-air missile systems have been installed around the perimeter. A pilot from the F/A-18 squadron raised his hand. "Ma'am, what's the threat assessment for civilian shipping in the area? That's one of the busiest commercial shipping lanes in the world." Walsh's expression grew serious. Several merchant vessels have already been warned away from the area. International maritime law is being challenged, and tensions are escalating daily. The President has ordered a freedom of navigation operation to demonstrate our commitment to international waters remaining open to all nations. Sarah studied the photographs carefully, noting the placement of radar installations and the configuration of the runway complex. Her engineering background helped her analyze the defensive capabilities of the hostile forces, and what she saw was concerning. The island fortress represented a significant threat to any aircraft operating in the region, with overlapping fields of fire from multiple weapon systems. "Captain Chun," Commander Walsh said, drawing Sarah's attention back to the briefing. "Your squadron will be deployed aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford for this operation. The carrier is already en route to the South China Sea with a full complement of aircraft and support vessels." The mention of carrier operations sent a familiar thrill through Sarah's system. Landing an F-35 on a pitching deck in the middle of the ocean was one of the most challenging aspects of naval aviation, requiring split-second timing and absolute precision. She had qualified for carrier operations just 6 months ago, after weeks of intensive training that pushed both her skills and her aircraft to their limits. After the briefing, Sarah returned to her quarters to prepare for deployment. The small room contained the accumulated belongings of her military career, photographs from flight school, commendation certificates, and technical manuals that she studied constantly to stay current with her aircraft's capabilities. On her desk sat a framed picture of her parents at her commissioning ceremony, their faces beaming with pride at their daughter's achievement. Her phone rang, displaying her mother's number. Dr. Lisa Chun was a senior engineer at a major aerospace company, and her father, Dr. James Chun, worked for NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Both understood the demands of Sarah's career better than most parents could. "Hi, Mom," Sarah answered, settling into her desk chair. "Sarah, honey, I just saw the news about the situation in the South China Sea. Are you going to be involved in whatever response they're planning?" Sarah chose her words carefully, knowing that operational details were classified. "I can't discuss specifics, but yes, my squadron might be deploying soon. You know how these things work. We train constantly, so we're ready when needed." Her mother's voice carried a mixture of pride and worry that Sarah had heard since her first solo flight and training. "I know you're the best pilot they have, sweetheart, but promise me you'll be careful. Your father and I couldn't bear to lose you." "I promise, Mom. All that training you paid for at MIT isn't going to waste. I use that engineering knowledge every day to understand my aircraft better than anyone else. Plus, the F-35 is the most advanced fighter jet ever built. I'm as safe as I can possibly be." After ending the call, Sarah spent the evening reviewing technical manuals and flight procedures. The F-35 systems were incredibly complex, with capabilities that even experienced pilots were still learning to fully utilize. The aircraft's sensor fusion technology combined information from multiple sources to create a comprehensive picture of the battle space, giving the pilot unprecedented situational awareness. The next morning brought orders to report to Norfolk Naval Base for immediate transport to the carrier. Sarah packed her gear quickly, including the personal equipment that every pilot carried, backup navigation tools, survival gear, and the small mementos that provided comfort during long deployments. The drive to Norfolk took her through the Virginia countryside, past farms and small towns that seemed far removed from the international crisis brewing thousands of miles away. The USS Gerald R. Ford dominated the Norfolk harbor like a floating city. The massive nuclear-powered carrier stretched over 1,000 feet in length, its flight deck capable of launching and recovering dozens of aircraft in rapid succession. Sarah had served aboard carriers before, but the sight of the Ford still impressed her with its sheer scale and obvious power. As her transport helicopter approached the carrier's deck, Sarah could see aircraft being positioned for launch. F/A-18 Super Hornets occupied most of the available space, along with EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft and E-2D Hawkeye early warning planes. Her F-35 would join this formidable air wing, bringing stealth capabilities and advanced sensors to complement the other aircraft's strengths. The helicopter touched down precisely in the designated landing area, its rotors creating a hurricane of wind across the deck. Sarah grabbed her gear and ran toward the island's superstructure, where a petty officer waited to escort her to her stateroom. The organized chaos of carrier operations surrounded her, aircraft being moved, fuel lines connected, and weapons loaded under the careful supervision of experienced deck crews. Her stateroom was typical of carrier accommodations, small, efficient, and shared with another pilot. Lieutenant Jenny Martinez from the F/A-18 Squadron had already claimed one of the narrow bunks, her flight gear neatly arranged in the compact storage spaces. Martinez greeted Sarah with a warm smile and a firm handshake. "Welcome aboard, Sarah. I've heard great things about your flying from the guys who worked with your squadron during the last training cycle. It'll be good to have an F-35 driver out here with us." Sarah appreciated the professional welcome, especially after her recent experiences with the dismissive SEALs. "Thanks, Jenny. I'm looking forward to working with your squadron. The Super Hornet and F-35 make a great team when we coordinate our capabilities properly." That evening, Sarah attended her first brief aboard the carrier. The Air Wing Commander, Captain Michael Torres, outlined the mission parameters for the Freedom of Navigation operation. The carrier would proceed to international waters near the disputed islands, where it would conduct normal flight operations to demonstrate the right of passage through international airspace. "Make no mistake," Captain Torres emphasized, his weathered face reflecting years of combat experience. "This is not a training exercise. Intelligence indicates that hostile forces are prepared to challenge our presence in the area. Every pilot needs to be ready for the possibility that this operation could transition from peaceful demonstration to active combat without warning." The briefing room fell silent as the implications sank in. Sarah felt her heart rate increase slightly, but it was the controlled excitement of a predator preparing for the hunt rather than fear. Her training had prepared her for this moment, and her F-35 was specifically designed to dominate in contested airspace. Captain Torres continued, "Our rules of engagement authorize defensive action if hostile forces threaten our aircraft or vessels. However, we will not fire first. Any engagement must be clearly defensive in nature and proportional to the threat presented." As the pilots filed out of the briefing room, Sarah caught fragments of conversation from the other aviators. Some expressed concern about the hostile forces' capabilities, while others seemed eager to test their skills against a real enemy. The mix of anticipation and anxiety was familiar from her training days, but this time the stakes were real. That night, as the Ford steamed through the Pacific darkness toward the South China Sea, Sarah lay in her narrow bunk listening to the sounds of the ship. The constant hum of machinery, the occasional footsteps in the corridor, and the subtle motion of the massive vessel cutting through the waves created a rhythm that would become familiar during the deployment. She thought about the mocking comments from the SEALs just weeks before, their dismissive attitude toward her capabilities. Soon, she would have the opportunity to prove that skill and training mattered more than physical size or gender. The F-35 Lightning II was an equalizer, a technological marvel that amplified the abilities of its pilot regardless of their appearance. As sleep finally claimed her, Sarah's last conscious thought was of the complex dance that lay ahead. Dozens of aircraft operating in a confined space above a hostile ocean, where split-second decisions could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophe. Tomorrow would bring her first combat-ready launch from the Ford's deck, the beginning of an operation that would test everything she had learned in her military career. Captain Sarah Chun had heard every joke before. The whispers followed her through the corridors of the naval base like shadows, and today was no different. As she walked toward the briefing room, carrying her flight helmet under her arm, she caught fragments of conversation from a group of Navy SEALs lounging near the coffee station. "Look at that tiny thing," one of them chuckled, his voice carrying across the space. "How's she supposed to reach the pedals in an F-35? They need to get her a booster seat." Another SEAL, a burly man with arms covered in tattoos, shook his head dismissively. "I heard she only got the assignment because they needed to fill some quota. Put a real pilot in that $35 million jet, not some diversity hire who probably can't even parallel park." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept walking. At 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing barely 120 pounds, she had endured these comments throughout her entire military career. The assumption that her small stature meant she lacked capability had followed her from flight school to her first squadron assignment, and now to this elite posting at Naval Air Station Oceana. The SEALs had arrived 3 days ago for a joint training exercise, and their dismissive attitude toward her had been immediate and obvious. They treated her like a mascot rather than a fellow warrior, despite the fact that she had logged over 2,000 hours in various military aircraft and had graduated at the top of her F-35 training class. "Hey, princess," called out the tattooed SEAL as she passed. "Make sure you don't scratch the paint job. That bird costs more than most people make in a lifetime." Sarah stopped and turned to face him, her dark eyes steady and calm. The SEAL was easily twice her weight, his muscular frame filling out his camouflage uniform. His name tape read Morrison, and the chevrons on his collar indicated he was a senior chief petty officer. "Senior Chief," she said evenly, "I appreciate your concern for taxpayer property. I'll be sure to handle the aircraft with the same precision I use for everything else in my job." Morrison's buddies snickered at her response, clearly interpreting it as evidence of her supposed inadequacy. "That's what I'm worried about, sweetheart," Morrison replied. "Flying a fighter jet isn't the same as flying a crop duster back on the farm." Sarah could have told him about her background, how she had grown up in San Francisco, the daughter of 2 aerospace engineers, how she had earned a degree in aeronautical engineering from MIT before joining the Navy. She could have mentioned her perfect scores on the aviation selection test battery, or the fact that she had never failed a check ride in her entire career. Instead, she simply nodded politely and continued toward the briefing room. The morning's mission brief was routine, a training flight over the Atlantic to practice air-to-air combat maneuvers with 2 other F-35s from her squadron. Lieutenant Commander Jackson, the flight lead, went through the standard procedures while Sarah took careful notes. The other pilots in the room treated her with professional respect, unlike the SEALs who continued to make jokes whenever they thought she couldn't hear. After the briefing, Sarah made her way to the equipment room to suit up. The process of donning her flight gear was second nature by now. The G-suit that would help her withstand the crushing forces of high-speed maneuvers, the survival vest loaded with emergency equipment, the helmet with its sophisticated display systems. Each piece of equipment had been carefully fitted to her smaller frame, customized to ensure optimal performance. As she walked toward her aircraft, Sarah felt the familiar surge of excitement that came before every flight. The F-35 Lightning II stood on the tarmac like a predatory bird, its angular surfaces designed to slip through enemy radar undetected. The stealth fighter represented the pinnacle of aviation technology, packed with sensors and weapons systems that made it the most advanced combat aircraft ever built. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, her dedicated crew chief, was already conducting the pre-flight inspection. Rodriguez had been working on military aircraft for 15 years, and his expertise showed in every careful check of the jet systems. Unlike the visiting SEALs, Rodriguez had never questioned Sarah's abilities. He had seen her fly, had watched her execute complex maneuvers with a precision that impressed even veteran pilots. "She's ready for you, Captain," Rodriguez reported, handing Sarah the aircraft logbook. "All systems are green, fuel is topped off, and the engines are running like silk. Weather forecast shows clear skies with light winds." Sarah conducted her own walk-around inspection, checking every surface and panel with the thoroughness that had been drilled into her during training. The F-35's external appearance revealed little of the sophisticated technology hidden beneath its skin. Advanced radar systems, electronic warfare capabilities, and precision weapons were all controlled from the cockpit through touchscreens and voice commands. As she climbed the ladder to the cockpit, Sarah noticed the group of SEALs had gathered on the observation deck to watch the launch. Morrison was pointing at her aircraft, probably making another joke about her qualifications. She settled into the ejection seat and began the startup sequence, her hands moving across the controls with practiced efficiency. The F-35 systems came online one by one: navigation computers, threat warning systems, communications equipment, and weapons controls. The aircraft's artificial intelligence began processing information from dozens of sensors, creating a comprehensive picture of the airspace around the base. Sarah's helmet display showed a three-dimensional representation of her surroundings, with friendly aircraft highlighted in blue and the empty training areas marked in green. "Tower, Lightning 401 requesting taxi clearance," Sarah transmitted, her voice professional and calm. "Lightning 401, cleared to taxi runway 09 left via taxiway Delta," came the response from air traffic control. The F-35's powerful engine pushed the aircraft forward as Sarah guided it toward the runway. Through her canopy, she could see the other two jets from her squadron preparing for takeoff. The morning sun reflected off their surfaces, creating brilliant flashes of light that reminded her why she had fallen in love with aviation in the first place. At the runway threshold, Sarah ran through her final checks. Engine parameters were normal, flight controls responded correctly, and all warning lights were dark. The tower cleared her for takeoff, and she pushed the throttle forward. The F-35 accelerated down the runway with devastating power, the force pressing her back into her seat despite the support of her G-suit. As the aircraft lifted off, Sarah felt the familiar sensation of leaving the Earth behind. The complaints and doubts of the SEALs fell away with the ground below, replaced by the pure joy of flight. Up here, surrounded by the vast blue of the Atlantic sky, her size and gender meant nothing. What mattered was skill, training, and the bond between pilot and machine. The other aircraft in her flight joined up in a standard formation, their voices crackling through her helmet speakers as they coordinated their training exercise. For the next 2 hours, they would practice the complex dance of aerial combat, honing the skills that might one day mean the difference between victory and defeat in actual battle. Sarah had no way of knowing that this routine training flight would be her last peaceful mission for quite some time. Far across the ocean, in a region where international tensions were rising daily, hostile forces were making plans that would soon test every skill she possessed. The mocking voices of the SEALs would be forgotten in the face of a real threat that demanded nothing less than perfection from both pilot and aircraft. As Lightning 401 climbed toward its assigned altitude, Sarah Chun was simply focused on being the best pilot she could be. The storm that was coming would prove whether that was enough.